The interrogation lasted 14 hours. Amanda Knox was 20 years old, in a foreign country, being questioned in her second language, without a lawyer. By the time it ended, she had signed a statement that she would later say was false, one that placed her at a crime scene she did not belong to. Investigators told her her memory was blocked, that her mind was protecting her from what she had done. They suggested names, repeated assertions, and framed hypotheses as facts. Knox later reported being struck in the back of the head at least twice. Exhaustion blurred time, suggestion and pressure narrowed choices. She recanted the statement the following morning. Italian prosecutors preserved it. For 8 years, that document shadowed her life across 2 countries, 2 convictions, 2 appeals, and the final intervention of Italy's highest court. The most devastating fact is simple and precise. A 14-hour interrogation produced a single anchor around which a prosecution rotated, despite its author's immediate withdrawal. The record shows how a justice process can be set in motion, not by conclusive evidence, but by a coerced paper trail that proves remarkably resilient once introduced into a case file. On November 1st, 2007, Meredith Kercher was found murdered in the cottage she shared with Amanda Knox and 2 other women in Perugia, Italy. Meredith was 21, a British student abroad studying languages and literature at the University for Foreigners of Perugia. Her death was brutal. Sexual violence combined with multiple stab wounds. The scene in the small, dimly lit house was chaotic and intimate, a private space made violent and public in a way that demanded swift investigation. Police had a body, a place, and a circle of people connected by living arrangements and social ties. Investigators arrived with methods and assumptions, and those tools began to focus almost immediately. Among those present, Amanda Knox became the center of attention. The reasons were a mixture of behavior, circumstance, and the human tendency to narrativize, odd gestures reported by neighbors, a visible relationship with Raffaele Solicito, and the deep pressure on investigators to produce answers quickly in a high-profile death. From that moment, the case acquired a primary axis: Meredith's murder and Amanda Knox's proximity to it, around which decisions, interpretations, and actions would revolve. The investigation narrowed early and decisively. Amanda Knox, an American exchange student, had been in Perugia for several months and was, by all accounts, energetic and socially engaged. She had been dating Raffaele Solicito for roughly a week. These ordinary facts were transmuted into suspicion. Police and prosecutors interpreted gestures and laughter as indicators of callousness or deceit. Witness accounts that might have lent context were read through a lens that presumed culpability rather than tested it. This narrowing produced one clear consequence. Evidence gathering and hypothesis testing were subordinated to a developing narrative that aligned with investigators' initial instincts. A separate line of inquiry followed Rudy Guede, whose DNA would later be located extensively at the scene. But rather than creating parallel threads to be evaluated and compared, the investigative apparatus frequently prioritized the Knox-Solicito theory in interviews, forensics, and public statements. The demeanor of those involved became, in practical terms, evidence, and the institutional preference for an early conclusion made alternative explanations harder to pursue with the same vigor, resources, or attention to procedural safeguards. The interrogation itself reads like a study in how vulnerability is exploited within interrogation settings. On the night of November 5th into November 6, 2007, Knox was summoned to the police station. The session consumed roughly 14 hours. Italian statute permitted questioning in certain circumstances without a lawyer present, and that permissibility was applied. During the interview, investigators used techniques that included psychological suggestion, repeated assertions of facts not established, and the presentation of hypothetical reconstructions as if they were known. They suggested that Knox's recollection of the night was blocked, a phrase that frames absent memory as evidence of suppression and invites confession. They named individuals, including Patrick Lumumba, and led Knox toward acceptance of their version. Forsaken by sleep and comfort, and confronted by the prospect of immediate accusation, Knox signed a written account that she later said she produced under duress. The following morning she recanted, stating she had said what she believed would end the interrogation. Despite Lumumba's alibi being quickly corroborated and his subsequent release after 2 weeks of detention, Knox's recanted statement remained part of the prosecutorial scaffolding. Forensic evidence became the arena in which the case's contestability was most visible. A kitchen knife recovered from Rafael Solicito's apartment was prosecuted as a possible murder implement. Laboratory tests identified fragments of DNA described as belonging to Amanda Knox on the handle and a minute trace described as Meredith Kercher's on the blade. Independent forensic experts would later raise serious doubts about both the quantity and the interpretation of those genetic findings. The DNA on the blade, critics said, was below reliable detection thresholds, meaning the signal was so faint that it could not be confidently attributed to a particular individual. The chain of custody and contamination prevention measures at the Italian laboratory were also questioned. Gloves changed inconsistently, samples handled in open environments, and evidence bags left accessible. A bra clasp reported to contain Rafael Solicito's DNA had been discovered on the floor and left in place for 47 days before collection, during which time it was handled by multiple officers. Forensic methodology, in short, was not uniformly applied. The argument that emerged from defense experts emphasized contamination risk and interpretive overreach. While the prosecution treated the lab's findings as conclusive, those competing professional judgments would be central across trials and appeals. Conviction, reversal, reconviction, and final exoneration comprised the juridical odyssey that followed. In December 2009, a Perugia court convicted Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito of murder and sexual violence. Knox received a 26-year sentence, Solicito 25. By then, Knox had already spent nearly 2 years in Italian custody, under conditions that she and her defenders would later criticize as traumatic and punitive. The appellate court in Perugia overturned those convictions in October 2011, citing unreliable DNA evidence and significant procedural failings in forensic practice. Knox returned home to the United States, believing the matter resolved. That resolution proved temporary. In 2013, Italy's Supreme Court annulled the acquittal and ordered a new trial, a decision that reinstated legal peril. Convicted again in absentia in 2014, Knox remained abroad and did not return for sentencing. The roller coaster terminated in March 2015 when the Court of Cassation, Italy's highest court, definitively overturned the conviction and declared the investigative process fundamentally flawed. The court's language emphasized insufficiency of evidence and pervasive procedural errors. The formal clearing arrived 8 years after the initial interrogation, after a sequence of decisions that alternately condemned and released her, an institutional back and forth that left permanent marks on the individuals involved and on public confidence in the processes at work. Rudy Guede's trajectory stood in stark contrast to the shifting fortunes of Knox and Solicito. Guede, an Ivorian migrant who had been in Perugia at the time, was identified quickly through DNA extensively present at the crime scene. Biological traces on Meredith Kercher's body and in the room indicated his involvement more clearly and consistently than the evidence linking others. He fled to Germany, but was extradited to Italy in November 2007. Tried separately in a fast-track procedure, he was convicted in 2008 and received a 30-year sentence that was later reduced to 16 on appeal. Guede served his term and was released in 2021. Throughout, he offered varying accounts of the night, sometimes asserting partial responsibility, sometimes denying sole culpability. But among the 3 persons prosecuted, Guede's conviction remained the one sustained without reversal across Italy's judicial reviews. His presence in the material record, the DNA, the eyewitness fragments, the physical traces, contrasted with the contested and often compromised evidence connected to Knox and Solicito. The case thus presents a paradox. A single physical lead that appears stable next to a series of procedural and interpretive errors that destabilized other threads of inquiry. The investigation revealed systemic tendencies rather than isolated mistakes. Legal scholars, forensic scientists, and wrongful conviction advocates have treated the case as a textbook example of investigative tunnel vision. Once investigators and prosecutors adopted a theory that Knox and Solicito were centrally implicated, subsequent actions were frequently organized to fit that hypothesis, rather than to disprove it. That pattern showed up in interrogations, where suggestions supplanted neutral questioning, in the handling of forensic material, where contamination protocols were inconsistently applied, and in courtroom framing, where narrative coherence sometimes mattered more than evidentiary nuance. The 14-hour interrogation functioned as a pivot. It produced a statement that prosecutors kept even after its author repudiated it, and it shaped public perception and prosecutorial momentum. The scientific contestation over DNA and the procedural irregularities identified by appellate courts did not produce an immediate overhaul of Italian criminal procedure. Instead, what emerged was a documented and repeatedly analyzed case study that scholars could cite when illustrating how institutional pressures, cognitive biases, and weak procedural safeguards combine to produce wrongful or unreliable prosecutions. The legacy of the case is less a catalog of law changes than a corpus of cautionary analysis. Amanda Knox's ordeal became a reference point in international legal scholarship on interrogation technique, false confessions, and evidentiary interpretation. Her 14-hour interrogation, carried out without legal counsel and in a language that was not her own, has been taught as an exemplar of how susceptibility to suggestion increases under stress. The case provided concrete examples of mechanisms by which a system can fail: narrowing suspect list prematurely, equating demeanor with guilt, accepting compromised forensic results, and demonstrating institutional reluctance to abandon a theory after it has been officially pursued. Yet, despite this intense scrutiny and the formation of a rich literature that dissects the case from psychological, legal, and forensic perspectives, Italy did not enact sweeping reforms in response. No single statute changed the interrogation rights landscape overnight. No universal forensic protocol was immediately mandated as a result. What the Knox case produced was a durable, heavily cited case study, a cautionary narrative used in classrooms, policy reports, and legal briefs to show how comprehensively a justice system can misfire when it decides the answer before the evidence is complete. Meredith Kercher was 21 years old. She was studying abroad, engaged in future plans that were suddenly and violently truncated. Her family has lived with this case for nearly 2 decades, navigating grief and public attention that refracted through conflicting accounts, media spectacle, and prolonged court battles. Rudy Guede remains the single defendant whose conviction for Meredith's murder was not overturned. Amanda Knox spent 4 years in Italian custody, was convicted twice, and was definitively acquitted in 2015. 8 years after a 14-hour interrogation produced a statement she immediately recanted. The evidence, when evaluated dispassionately and against accepted forensic standards, never consistently supported Knox's guilt. The investigation, as it unfolded, did. The institutional path from accusation to conviction to exoneration took 2 countries and myriad legal maneuvers to traverse. The larger lesson is stark and precise. When investigators prioritize a narrative over an open inquiry, justice becomes performative rather than probative, and the human costs are long-lasting. The search for truth in Meredith Kercher's death collided with procedures that, in practice, sometimes obscured it. Subscribe to Case Files TV, because an investigation that decides the answer first is not an investigation. It is a performance, and the public deserves scrutiny of the actors, the methods, and the institutions that carry it out.